Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about dataset popularity and how we use it in DataHub, as well as how we get it from query logs and query activity. So first off, why do we care about this? So for different people, dataset popularity implies different things. For the data platform owner, it enables them to kind of understand what's going on within the enterprise. How is data being used? In what systems is it being used? If you've got like a Snowflake and a BigQuery, let's say, and you want to understand which one is actually being used by more people and is more popular, you can understand that using popularity and usage logs. It can also help point you in the right direction for where to dedicate more resources and where to, both in terms of people and in terms of compute power, so that you never have an issue as you operate. For data engineers, data popularity is a little bit different. For them, it kind of helps them understand how are people using the things that you're producing. So kind of like an impact analysis within the company, as well as helps you prioritize among the data assets that you actually produce, which ones are most important, and which ones are actually getting used, which ones, say, could use more documentation to improve usage, because it's a great data set that you produced. It can also help you streamline the deprecation process. So let's say a data set that you're trying to deprecate still has 100 queries a week. Well, then you probably don't want to deprecate it just yet. Instead, you want to look at the popularity and the usage, figure out who exactly that person is, and reach out, help them migrate to a different solution. For data scientists, popularity and usage is a major trust signal. It helps kind of understand, is this thing someone that someone put out a year ago and hasn't touched since, or is it something that is being regularly updated, regularly used, and is something that you can rely on, given that other people are also relying on it. The other thing you can do is you can look at kind of the other queries that people are issuing against that data set, figure out, say, what other tables are relevant here, what is it commonly joined on, which keys, and so forth. So you can kind of determine not just whether or not to, but also how to query that data set. And then, helping everyone is, we can use usage and popularity data to improve search rankings and, improve the ordering of things and the lineage visualization and so forth. So lots of product improvements for DataHub can also come out of the usage statistics. So let's look at what we're collecting and kind of how we're doing that. So right now we support BigQuery and Snowflake for usage stats. BigQuery, we're using the BigQuery logs and we're parsing those out. And then with Snowflake, we are using the access history and the query history views, joining these together and getting our popularity and usage data that way. And for each data set, we can collect per user usage frequencies. So, person A is using it this much, person B is using it this much. We can also collect how they're using it, what queries they issued, a lot of granularity here, even to the extent of what columns are they frequently querying versus which ones are not being used. And once again, we kind of roll this up and can get frequent queries across all the people using a given data set as well. So how did we design this? I want to talk about this a little bit. So some of the constraints we were pushing against, scale wise, it wouldn't be unheard of for a company to be issuing 500,000 queries per day against, say, BigQuery or Snowflake or a similar data warehouse, and have 10K users. So this was kind of our North Star on what sort of scale we might want to support. They'd want to retain a decent bit of historical data so that they can view this historical usage over time. Let's say a year here, but it varies for different enterprises. Some might only care for 30 days, some might care for many years. And the last thing is we want to avoid refetching the same data from the same source system repeatedly. What this means is, if we're collecting data, we only want to pull that given piece of the usage log or the query log or whatever it is once, and then not have to pull it repeatedly. So given this, some of the decisions we made. The first is we're going to start with a batch-based system. So you can configure it to run hourly or daily, whatever you'd like, and we'll pull kind of the most recent queries in history that has happened in that past time period, and then we aggregate it during ingestion, because this data at the top level of scale, say if a given log event is 2 kilobytes, this reaches a gig or so in memory, which we probably don't want to do. So we have a memory efficient algorithm for kind of pulling this in while preventing the memory usage of ingestion to blow up. And then we do some pre-aggregation here on a per data set level, roll it up so that we get frequent users of a data set, frequent columns used of a data set, frequent queries of a data set. And then we take that information, we can push it into through GMS into Elastic. And that's where we can store these aggregated statistics, do additional aggregations on them, and then surface them in the UI as you might expect. So,
Harshal, I guess one more interesting constraint in the design that you probably had was not adding one more moving part to DataHub, like, oh, you've got to go run a Spark job, or you have to go run some other big data processing job to compute this stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually kind of a good segue into the demo piece. So I wanted to show how BigQuery and Snowflake usage work. The Snowflake one, I'm actually going to show you how it's looking when scheduled with Airflow, because that's kind of the common use case here. You schedule it on a daily basis, and then how it looks in the UI. So we can start with how BigQuery usage works. So right now I have a little recipe configuration. It works the same way as most of the other sources do. You just have a new plugin type called BigQuery usage. You can put in the project ID for BigQuery. I just have a playground instance that I'm using. And I unfortunately hadn't queried this instance in a few days. So I just reverted the start time to the beginning of this month. And then here we're just going to dump it to a file instead of pushing it to REST as you might normally do. And simply running it as you might expect will take a little bit to pull all of the data. So what is it doing here? It's pulling the BigQuery usage logs from the cloud logging product from Google, and then doing a little bit of pre-aggregation here, and then dumping that into a file here. Cool. So this might take a little bit because the time range is quite large. There it is. Okay. So you see a couple instances. We can see the general queries that I was, or the general data sets that I was using. And then if we want to, we can take a more detailed look into the actual usage data that was produced. So we have, emails, frequent queries, and then the fields and each one of their usages as well. And we have this on a per day basis, per bucket, or per data set basis. Cool. So at Snowflake, it works pretty similar. I actually added it to our demo instance here. It's pretty straightforward how it looks. This time we're running the ingestion using direct code because we want to do that inside of Airflow. And it's remarkably similar. We first ingest Snowflake, and then we add Snowflake usage in kind of a pipeline. So you get both of them at once. Once again, kind of set your configuration. And then I wanted to get a bunch of historical data. So I set the start time manually. But then beyond this, I might just leave it blank and it will automatically do the current day. And yeah, now that we've kind of run this successfully, we can see the little green box there. We can head over to the demo instance and we can see where this is surfaced in a couple places. So the first is we see immediately the queries, that the number of queries that have been issued against this data set. We can see that it's 78 in this time period. And we can also see, I and Swaroop have issued queries against it. And so we can see the top users, and this is going to be ordered by frequency. So you know that, I've done the most and Swaroop's done the second most. Beyond that, we can also see, per column, so entity and earn, these are the two columns here. We can see the entity has had 78 queries per month, and the earn field has had only 43 queries per month. So we know that, people maybe use the entity field more than the earn field for whatever the reason might be. And what might that reason be? Well, we can actually hop over to the query instance, and we can take a look at some recent queries that have been issued that reference this table. So, your standard select count, group by entity. Here's where we might guess that the entity field is being used more frequently than the earn field or other fields. And then we can also see people are creating other generated tables that reference this all entities table. So we can kind of understand how are people using it, how they're joining on the earn, and so forth. So we get a lot more rich information about how people are using this data set. So that's it for the demo. I want to hop back over to talk quickly about what's next here. So obviously we're going to iron out the edge cases and figure out any issues that we might have. We're going to integrate usage statistics from more systems, so expanding beyond BigQuery and Snowflake, as well as getting more rich integrations of this usage data into the search ranking, lineage viz, and so forth. With the UI improvements, we've got a bunch of time series data for the usage statistics, and right now we're kind of only showing queries per month or something. We can also add line charts so that if you're expecting a certain, say, data set to be deprecated, you're going to look for the usage per day to kind of taper off as you migrate people over. And then finally, expanding our time series metadata piece to add mechanisms for using no code to like using a similar no code approach to expanding that. So yeah, with that, love to hand it over to Shashanka.
Awesome. Thank you, Harshal, for that. Yeah, if people have questions about how to use it, my first question was, why is Snowflake and Snowflake usage two different sources? And there's actually a good reason for it, because in some of these sources, the place where you get usage data from is actually different from the place you get the metadata from. In some cases, you actually need elevated privileges to get usage data out. So it makes sense to separate out those two pathways. One of the things I'm also very excited about is how simple we have managed to keep it so that it's still the same deployment footprint that is able to also pull out usage logs, and it doesn't kind of overwhelm the system. Once we add time series metadata support for no code, I think it'll be pretty cool to see different kinds of systems being able to push usage metadata into DataHub.